Here, there we go. Some things you should know about the Ohio legislature, because all state legislatures run very differently from each other in surprising ways. I learned that more and more with my colleagues around the country, that no two legislatures are alike. Here in Ohio, we actually have what's considered a full-time legislature, which makes us one of the only a handful of legislatures across the country that at least theoretically meets year-round. And our legislative session is 2 years long. It just started back in January, so they will be ending, as you see, in December 2022. And then the next General Assembly will start in early 2023. Right now, they'll still be around for a year and a half to consider House Bill 315 and Senate Bill 182, which are the two bail bills. We don't want them to take that long, but they do have a year and a half. It's also helpful to know what you're up against, who your audience is, who you're going to be dealing with. And you can see there, our legislature here in Ohio is tilted very heavily towards Republicans. In the Senate, we have 33 members. 24 of those are Republican, 9 Democrat, 99 in the House side, 64 Republican, 35 Democrat. Now, I know, of course, it's instinctive for many people to see an R or a D next to a legislator's name and assume something about them or their positions. But here what we have is 2 bail bills that are supported by a significant amount of people in both parties, which is great because lesson number 1 really with trying to get something done with the Ohio legislature is can you get the Republicans to do it, since they are the ones that have essentially all of the power over there. But again, we've got 2 bipartisan bills here that we're very excited about. Now in Ohio, we are very committee driven. And what I mean by that is there are a variety of legislative committees, and all of them allow people from the outside, that is non-legislators, to come in and testify on bills that they are hearing in committee. And there's a lot of different committees. This session, there's 41 of them, which is, I edited my PowerPoint from last session when I was doing something like this, and they have 5 or 6 more committees than they did even last session. And you see that they are divided up by subject matter. So you have criminal justice and public utilities and finance and agriculture and so on and so forth. So when there's a bill that fits underneath one of those topics, then it generally gets assigned to that committee. So issues regarding mass incarceration, the death penalty, bail, fines and fees in court, those sorts of things, those are typically going to go to criminal justice, or in the Senate, the Judiciary Committee. And so House Bill 315, we know this now, has been assigned to the House Criminal Justice Committee, and Senate Bill 182 has been assigned to the Senate Judiciary Committee. Something else to know about committees and how they're run, the majority party in the respective chamber is the one who runs the committees. So if the Republicans have the numbers in the House, that means it is all Republican chairpeople for all the committees, and it means that there will be more Republicans than Democrats per committee. You won't find any committees over at the State House where there are more Democrats or a tie number of Democrats as there are Republicans. Something also to know about committees is that lopsided membership in those committees. You should also know that typically many legislators are not in Columbus all week. What they do, some of them are there Mondays, some of them are there Fridays, but Tuesday and Wednesday, and to some extent Thursdays, are their really busy days. Those are the ones where all day they're going in and out of committees, hearing people testify, talking to their fellow colleagues, hearing their colleagues testify on bills, passing bills, and then going to the floor on the House and Senate where the whole body will pass legislation. That is the step after a bill is voted out of committee, then it goes to the floor of that chamber and then over to the other chamber to start that process over. Committee, full vote, committee, full vote. And if it gets through that entire process, then it goes to the governor for his or her signature, should it reach that far. Now, as far as committees work, and this is relevant for those of you who are interested in potentially testifying on one or both of these bills, is there's nothing written in stone with regard to committees and the progress of bills throughout them. Typically, what happens is that bills must have at least 3 hearings before they are voted on. And in Ohio, it's broken down rather neatly, most of the time, but again, not always. So your first hearing is typically when the sponsor or sponsors come in, describe the bill, what the bill does, and then ask essentially for the favorable consideration of their members when that time comes. That is to vote the bill out. The second hearing is almost always proponent testimony. The people who are in favor of the bill coming in, talking about why they think the committee should pass the bill. Third hearing, typically opponent and possibly interested party. Ohio utilizes this interested party status that is, however you want to look at it. Maybe it's somewhere in between proponent and opponent. You like some things about the bill, you don't like other things about the bill. Or you're lukewarm on the bill, you just think there are some things the committee should know, et cetera, et cetera. That's interested party testimony. Now, that said, where you see how it breaks down nice and neat, first, second, third hearing, look, a bill could get 7 hearings, it can get 8 hearings, it can get a dozen hearings and never pass out of committee. There is no sort of magic trigger under Ohio law or the way that the legislature operates that says we're going to have 3 hearings, only 3 hearings, and then we're going to hold a vote. So again, you can have a bill that has 7 or 8 or a dozen hearings and it never gets out of committee. I have seen when the legislature wants to operate particularly quickly because there is something time sensitive, I have seen bills get 1 hearing and 1 hearing only before being passed out of committee. But for your purposes with House Bill 315 and Senate Bill 182, I think we can look for a more standard process broken down. We've already had the first hearing for both of these bills with sponsor testimony. So that part is out of it. And then now we are gearing up for that second hearing with proponent testimony. But again, no limits on how many hearings a bill might receive, and no sort of magic time when it must be voted out of committee, or when a vote must be held. Now, for those of you who are fortunate enough not to deal with the legislature for a living, the bad side is that learning and following what committees are up to can be very difficult, even for me sometimes. And that is because the committee agendas are released 1 week at a time. So there's no such thing as, oh, well, I know 3 weeks from now the committee will be hearing these bills, or 2 months from now they're going to be hearing those bills. No, it does not operate that way whatsoever. We only know from week to week what bills the committees are going to be hearing. And those agendas are typically sent out, I say here, Thursday or Friday. I think the trend in the last year or two has been much more towards those notices coming out on Friday. And unfortunately, we have some committees that are not sending out their notices until sometime Monday of that week. That's something to watch out for with House Criminal Justice Committee, because it's one of these committees where I've noticed that trend. So you might not know about whether that week House Criminal Justice, which meets on a Thursday, typically, you might not know until that Monday. And then just so everybody knows, typically Senate Judiciary, again, where SB 182 is, Senate Judiciary meets typically on Tuesdays at 3 and House Criminal Justice Thursdays at 11. The other rub with all of this is that if you do want to testify, whether you want to testify in person or you just want to submit written testimony, both of which are valuable, those must be submitted to the committee chair at least 24 hours before the scheduled hearing. So even if you're going to be going in person, talking in person, the committee still requires you to submit your written testimony at least 24 hours in advance. That can be rather difficult for those of us who are following multiple bills and multiple committees any given week. But for those of you who are only following the bail bills and only interested in getting involved in the bail bills, that does give you some time to prepare ahead of time and not rushing to do this at the last minute. As I mentioned, you can do written only testimony or testify in person. And so some helpful hints here and just some things I've seen in the past. There's no limits with regard to how long your testimony can be. That said, as I said before, there are committee members, there are legislators, they're in and out of committee rooms. These committees overlap. They're frequently getting up and leaving. They're doing this all day. Suffice to say, they hear a lot of people testify every single week. And so for that reason, I always recommend keeping your testimony rather short. My own testimony, the ACLU of Ohio's own testimony, typically is only 2 or 3 pages long. Now, I also have other opportunities to reach out to legislators and meet with them, so the testimony doesn't always have to be so long. But as a rule of thumb, 2 or 3 pages is what I like to keep it at. I tell people the committee does not want to hear 10 pages of testimony. They cannot digest 10 pages of testimony. There's no reason for 10 pages of testimony 99% of the time. And the same goes for 6 pages of testimony or 5 pages of testimony or what have you. Committee hearings are also a give and take process. You deliver your testimony in person, and then it gives legislators a chance to ask you questions. Now, I understand that might give some people heartburn. You would be asked on the spot about different things about the bail bill. But what I think will happen, because I've seen this many, many times, I've been full-time lobbying over at the legislature for about 13 years now. The committee can quickly distinguish between those professionals that they see on a daily or weekly basis and know that these are the people that you ask the questions to. They get a very real sense for who is coming in that doesn't typically do this, that is spending their time and energy to come in and make their voices heard. And so they will tend to not ask difficult questions or many times any questions about the bill. And it's probable that you won't get asked any questions at all, particularly with multiple people testifying on a bill. They just want to kind of keep the train moving at that point. And a lot of times with bail bills, something like that, people are going to be talking about their personal experiences and not the bail bill itself. And if you are up there and they do ask you a question about bail bill, some particulars of it, there are other people in the room that will be able to answer that question, and you should not feel bad about punting to them and explaining that to the committee. There are also other opportunities for those of you who might not be able to do in-person or written testimony to make your voices heard. There's no, exercise your First Amendment rights. You can email them, you can call them, you can request meetings, you can do all sorts of things in addition to testimony or in place of testimony. Finally, something that might become relevant as these bail bills progress, and particularly if and when they get amended along the line. You see here, use the very real example of HB 315 and SB 182. That means HB House bill. It originated in the House. SB 182 originated in the Senate. SB 182. Some people have asked me before, well, if it passes the House, if House Bill 315 passes the House and goes over to the Senate, is it still House Bill 315 at that point, or does it become something different? No, it's House Bill 315 through the entire process. So if you do happen to see a House bill, something HB something, pop up in a Senate committee, then you know it has already been through the House at that point. Now, where again this might become very relevant for these particular bills, technically speaking, is you might pull up information, you might pull up a bill because you want to know more about it, you might want to read through it, and it would be again, to use a relevant example, amended House Bill 315. When you see that word amended, it means the bill has changed since it was first introduced, and those changes have likely been rather small. Doesn't mean they're not important, it just means that they're rather small and don't affect the entirety of the bill to a great degree. But if you see sub or substitute House Bill 315, that means that the bill has changed probably pretty considerably since it was first introduced. And if you see amended substitute House Bill 315, well, that means it's gone through changes more than once, essentially. Finally, you see here, so you know if you do want to pick through the bill and read it, reading legislation is very easy. If you have it right there in front of you and you see text with a line through it, that means that that's what they are going to be removing from current law. If you see underlined text in the bill, that's what they are adding to current law. And if you see text that's not underlined and it doesn't have a line through it, that's current law. So when in Ohio and other places, when they introduce a bill, you get all of the language that's being affected by the legislation. And again, text with a line through it, that's what they're taking out. Underlined text, that's what they're putting in. So that is your abbreviated version of Lobbying 101 and how to have an impact over at the State House. Up on your screen now is if you want to follow the State House a little bit more closely. Oh, I should mention as well, how do people get legislative schedules so that you can keep up to date as to what's going on if you want to testify? The best way to do it, well, you can follow the ACLU of Ohio on Twitter, and you're probably on our email list, and you're going to get information that way. But otherwise, contacting the committee chairs. In this case, it's Representative LaRae for House Criminal Justice. That's capital L, small a, capital R, small e, Chairman LaRae. And in Senate Judiciary, that's Chairman Manning. So I'll drop their contact information into the chat here in a little bit. But what you can do is email them and then just get asked to be added to the email distribution list for their particular committee. And you'll get these on Friday afternoons or so. You'll get the emails rolling in just the same as the rest of us who do this for a living. So with that, I'm a little bit over time. But if anybody has any questions or anything, feel free to ask. I'm also going to drop my contact information in the chat. So if you have questions later or in the future, you will also be able to reach me.